This is our video for VPP Lesson 18 vocabulary words. Our first word is gratis. Here's the sentence. The public defender provides a gratis defense to people who cannot afford legal assistance. So the keys in this sentence are the fact that the person cannot afford a lawyer to defend him or her. And if you go back to the beginning of the sentence, we have a public defender, so it's somebody employed by the government. So when they are giving a gratis defense, which is an adjective, they are not charging the person who has to go to court. It's free. It's without charge. So I chose this Bible verse to represent gratis. Ephesians 2:8-9. This should be familiar to everyone. For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God. Let's focus in on gift, not of works, lest any man should boast. So because our salvation is a free gift, it's not without cost, obviously, because Christ had to sacrifice himself on the cross for us. But for us, there is no cost. It is a gift. It is gratis. He gives us our salvation gratis. Next is conjecture. This is a noun. Cable news often seems to feature self-proclaimed experts full of conjecture about matters they pretend to understand. So a couple of clues in this sentence as to what conjecture means are the following. First of all, they're self-proclaimed, which means they don't have any legitimate credentials. And then they're pretending to understand what's going on. So when you make conjecture about something, you're guessing. There's little or no evidence. The evidence that is there might be questionable. It's speculation. It's guesswork. The opposite would be fact. Of course, in our American court system, if a lawyer were to just have conjecture in his or her case, then there's no way they would win for their client because you have to have good, hard, solid evidence. So just think of question marks because it's questionable. It's not reliable. It's all based on guesswork, conjecture. Our next word is progeny. You can figure it out easily from the meaning or from this sentence. Laura and Douglas are Mrs. Workman's progeny. So obviously they are my offspring, they are my children, they are my descendants, they are my young, although not so young anymore. The opposite of progeny would be ancestors. So here's a picture of my progeny, Laura and Douglas. Next is faux. This is a French word. It's not pronounced fox. Here's our sentence. The crack in the plastic veneer belied the car's faux wood dashboard. All right, look at plastic. Plastic and wood are not the same thing. And so the manufacturers of this car, they want the dashboard to look like real wood, but it's really plastic, and then you find out that it's not legitimate wood because of that crack that takes place. So if something is faux, it's artificial, it's fake, it's false, it's not genuine. Sometimes it's an imitation. The opposite would be authentic or true. So here's an example of faux diamonds. It's an advertisement. It says the same brilliance and quality for thousands less, because obviously real diamonds cost a lot of money. But then the picture on the right is of cubic zirconia, which is a fake diamond. They're faux diamonds. Next is genocide. Hopefully you know what this means already. Unfortunately, we see these stories in the news. In the last half of the 20th century, dozens of genocides, this is a noun, occurred around the world, resulting in over 23 million deaths. So death is your clue as to what genocide means. The deliberate destruction of a group of people. So of course you're probably thinking of a previous word, Holocaust. That was a genocide that happened in the mid 1900s in Europe. Here's a picture of some Jews in a concentration camp. And Hitler, of course, is who we think of when we think of genocide. Next is materialistic. Again, hopefully you know what this means already. This is an adjective. A materialistic society values money and purchases far more than ethical and intellectual pursuits. We have the opposite context clue here because ethical and intellectual pursuits would be the opposite of somebody who has materialistic pursuits. So, of course, this would be when you want material possessions. The opposite is altruistic. If somebody is altruistic, they're very generous. They give away what they have instead of hoarding it, keeping it for themselves. So here's a little picture of a girl who's gone shopping and she's got all these bags and who knows what she's bought or what obviously her mother has bought her. But unfortunately, this reflects our society because we just want more, 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 and more. Next is monolithic. The miners were exhausted after breaking through the monolithic cave wall. So this is an adjective, it's modifying wall. And look at the word mono. Mono means one, and that's kind of a clue here. Also think of a cave wall. The miners can't get through it. So it's going to be something very big and very heavy. Monolithic is an adjective which means massive, uniform. So think one big piece, going back to mono, and solid. So here's a picture. This is not a cave wall, but it's just this huge geological structure, not really structure, but piece of rock. It's just one massive uniform slab. It's monolithic. Next is foray. The enemy was routed because the foray was so unexpected. This is a noun. Your clues in this sentence are we've got an enemy being defeated. That's what routed means, like severe defeat. And it's unexpected is another clue. So a foray is a surprise attack. It's a raid. It's an incursion. The picture I put is a picture that represents Pearl Harbor. Hopefully you know from history, December 7th, 1941 is when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and we as Americans were totally taken by surprise. It was a foray which then led us into declaring war against Japan and entering into World War II. Next is quintessential. This is one of my favorite words. I just like the way it sounds. Always the quintessential professor, Dr. Jones even wore the prescribed tweed jacket with suede patches on the elbows, kind of a description of what a professor in a college setting would wear. So quintessential is an adjective, and it's telling us what something is when it's the most typical or ideal, kind of a model or a standard, or really what we expect. So, since they're talking about Dr. Jones in the sentence, I found a picture of Indiana Jones. Hopefully you know those movies, some of my favorite from when I was growing up. And Dr. Jones was a archaeology professor as well as going off on all of those adventures. So he's got the quintessential professor suit on, especially from the early part of the 1900s. Also, another thing to kind of help you remember what quintessential is, think about what would be the quintessential American meal. And probably what's coming to your mind is something like hamburger and French fries. Okay, quintessentially American. Next is predilection. This is a noun. I have a predilection for Mexican food, so we will go to Papa's and Beer for dinner tonight. That's my favorite Mexican restaurant. If you have a predilection for something, it's a preference towards someone or something, in this case Mexican food. A preference, a partiality, a penchant for something, which you guys should know already from a previous lesson. It's when you really like something. The opposite would be an aversion or hatred for something. So I just put a couple of pictures of things I have predilections for. I have preferences for things I like. Reading, obviously, New York Yankees, my favorite baseball team, and London. I love the city of London. I've been there once and I would love to go again. I have a predilection for London. Next is belabor. You're doing something here, so it's a verb. Maurice made his point and then belabored it before an audience of increasingly bored listeners. So he makes the point, but he keeps going on and on and on about it, and so the listeners tune out. They stop listening to him. Think about the word labor. If you're laboring, you're working hard, but if you're belaboring something, you're going overboard. You're overstressing it. You're overdoing it. You just won't let it go. sometimes you might feel like mom and dad belabor you with the way they emphasize how you've got to get good grades in school and you need to be successful. They might stress it too much so that you kind of tune them out or get tired of it. The opposite would be to disregard or ignore. So here's a picture. This woman is belaboring something to this man, and he is just tired of hearing her talk because she just won't be quiet. Next is rudimentary. Sherlock Holmes fans might like this. Sherlock Holmes could have said his deductions were rudimentary, but he told Dr. Watson they were elementary. So the definition of rudimentary is in this sentence. It means elementary. It means basic. It's not refined. It's not well developed. It's undeveloped, in fact. The opposite would be refined or sophisticated. So here's a picture of a teacher, kind of a silly picture, but look at this math fact. 22 minus 11 equals. That's rudimentary knowledge. It's very basic. It's very elementary. Of course, those of you who are in Algebra 2, geometry this year, your math has gone way beyond that. So you are not at a rudimentary level anymore. Your math skills are becoming more and more sophisticated. Next is allocate. This is a verb. Helene allocated funds equally to all her children, except Horatio, the evil twin who received a lump of coal. That's a horrible sentence, but anyways, if you allocate something, you set it aside. So she is setting aside money for her kids except for the one she doesn't like. It's to distribute, to allot, to designate, to apportion, or assign. So here's a picture. This is having to do with how money is allocated for roads and transportation. So 36% of the money is allocated for transit. 34% is set aside or allocated for highway, and then 21% local streets, and then 3% demand reduction and efficiency. So that's a small part of the pie that's allocated for that. Next is Zoftig. I believe this is a German word. At one time in history, a Zoftig figure, it's modifying figure, so it's an adjective, was an indicator of a family's economic prosperity. So when it says figure here, it means a body, a person's body, their shape, their figure. So it's kind of hard to figure out what it means from this context. So let me just give you the definition. Having a full or shapely figure. Synonym is curvaceous. So because the family makes a lot of money, that means they can eat a lot of food. And so it was considered, people would look upon you with admiration if you had this full figure. Of course, our culture has changed with that, and now we look down upon people who are overweight. That seems to happen a lot, especially females. So it's kind of hard to find a picture because most of them weren't appropriate, but I put this picture here that I found this girl with a t-shirt, and she says, "I'm not fat," and she really isn't. It's just she doesn't have that skinny stick figure that some girls think they need to have. She says, "I'm zoftig," and it just sounds kind of more sophisticated than just saying I'm fat or overweight. Next is manifesto. After declaring himself emperor for life, Dr. Insano, so this is obviously kind of sarcastic here, broadcast his manifesto, so it's a noun, outlining his intended form of government. Government is kind of your key here to figure out what manifesto is. It's a public declaration of policies or intentions. Proclamation. You might have heard of manifesto with Mrs. Corey in history this year, because probably the most famous manifesto is the Communist Manifesto, written by Karl Marx and another German philosopher named Friedrich Engels. And they wrote this pamphlet. It's really not a book, it's a pamphlet in 1848, I believe, where they espouse the principles of communism and socialism and talk about how those philosophies are the best for running countries. So this takes us to the end of this lesson. Please make sure you complete exercise 1 and sign your honor pledge.